guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering another unsolved mystery that will shock you. On Monday the 3rd of April in 2006, Brian Shaffer was reported missing. He had last been seen at a local bar in downtown Columbus, Ohio on Friday the 31st of March. He, nor any trace of him, has ever been found. Today we're going to be going over what authorities think happened to Brian and unpack some of the theories. Brian Randall Shaffer was born on February 25, 1979 in Pickering, Ohio to parents Randy and Renee. He finished high school in 1997 and went on to attend Ohio State University, and then in 2004 began studying medicine at their medicine college. He is described as being highly intelligent and dedicated to his studies. It's also noted that he was somewhat of a successful tennis player up until he was asked to cut his hair in order to continue playing, which he refused to do so. He was a responsible guy and was strongly opinionated, not in a bad way necessarily, he just believed in the things he believed in. Despite being in the top 10% of his class, his true passion did not lie with medicine, and this was something that he divulged only to his closest peers. But he wanted to start a band. Brian loved to play the guitar and took inspiration from Jimmy Buffett and Pearl Jam. He was so into Pearl Jam, in fact, that he even got their logo tattooed on his arm. During his first year of medical school, he met his girlfriend, Alexis Wagner, and she was also a first-year medical student at the time. The two of them met in class, and Brian asked her out to dinner and to study, and Alexis thought he was cute, so she said yes. Brian was 27 years old at the time, and she was a bit younger, but the two of them were getting on really well. By March of 2006, the couple had been dating for around 10 months, and it was rumoured that Brian was planning on proposing to Alexis during their upcoming trip to Florida for spring break. Brian's life looked perfect, but behind the scenes, he was dealing with some pretty dark stuff. His mother died of bone cancer in March 2006, so the same month he was wrapping up his final exams and getting ready to go to Florida for spring break. The trip to Miami was actually a gift from his mother, and she had given it to him the Christmas right before she died. So even though it was planned for only 3 weeks after her death, it was kind of special. This was the last gift from her, and so he was excited for it. Whilst he had a seemingly perfect life from the outside, it was obviously a really stressful time for Brian. He's going through his mother's death whilst dealing with medical school finals. It would be stressful for anyone to have to deal with all of this at once. His final exams came and went, and he and his friend, William Clint Florence, decided to go drinking to celebrate. They headed to a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona on the evening of Friday the 31st of March 2006 at around 9 p.m. They had multiple drinks at the Ugly Tuna, shots, beers, and when they were feeling pretty good, they decided to leave. They went to the Short North Tavern and had a few drinks there, then they moved on to another bar called Brothers. They eventually decided to leave Brothers and head back to the Ugly Tuna to watch a live band play. Even though it was a big walk, it was a good place to wrap the night up, and it was really popular with college kids, and so they set out. After setting off, Clint contacted his friend Meredith Reed, and she offered to come and pick them up and drive them to the Ugly Tuna. And yeah, Meredith came, picked them up, and then they all drove to the Ugly Tuna together. And then at 1:15 a.m. they were all seen taking an escalator up to the bar's entrance on the second story. There's no cameras inside the Ugly Tuna, just kind of some facing the escalator and lobby that lead to the entrance. Strangely enough, Brian comes back outside at approximately 1:55 a.m. and is seen on camera talking to two young women named Brighton and Amber. After this, he walks out of view of the bar and is never seen again. It's unclear what he did once he walked out of view. The women he was talking to outside of the bar, Brighton and Amber, said they saw him leaning against the bar at 1:58 a.m., so it's assumed that he went back inside. But Clint and Meredith claim that when they left the bar at 2 a.m. they didn't see Brian inside or out. So there's a 2-minute gap, 1:58 a.m. to 2 a.m., that leaves room for speculation. Did Brian leave with someone? And if so, why wasn't it captured on CCTV? One of the bar's cameras panned continuously around, and another was manually operated. So it's possible that they missed Brian leaving. There were only 2 ways in and out of the Ugly Tuna for the public: the front entrance and the fire escape. These 2 entrances were right next to each other, and the CCTV pulled from the courtyard that would have captured anyone leaving this exit also showed no sign of Brian. The manager of the bar said that nobody had used the fire escape or been in the stairwell leading to the fire escape exit all night. It just wouldn't make sense for someone to take this exit either, unless they were purposefully trying to slip out of the bar without being noticed. There was an elevator and a stairwell just outside the Ugly Tuna's entrance. They both led to a hallway that runs behind all of the businesses in the building. Now, what's interesting is the band playing that night used the elevator, and CCTV shows Brian did not leave with the band. And police interviewed every member of the band and they confirmed that Brian did not leave with them, but there is a chance that Brian could have used the stairwell or the elevator to leave the building. Another theory was that Brian climbed over the second-story balcony outside and jumped down. I'll show you a photo of it, but an expert in this case said that she does believe this was possible due to his height, but thinks it's unlikely that nobody saw him with how crowded the area was. But I think it's worth considering that Brian may have been trying to fly under the radar, and if he was, what was his motivation? He had a seemingly perfect life, a girlfriend he was about to propose to, great future career prospects, and a spring break trip planned for Monday. His friends Meredith, Clint, they all tried calling him multiple times but were unable to contact him. They eventually went home when the bar closed, but there was still no sign of Brian. There was actually no sign of Brian for the rest of the weekend. His father Randy tried to call him, his girlfriend Alexis tried to call him, and then, when Monday morning came around, he missed his flight. This same day, on the 3rd of April, Brian Shaffer was reported as a missing person. Now, before we get too far into this case, I just want to go over some of the CCTV footage we've just spoken about. The main part I want to talk about is at 1:55 a.m. outside the Ugly Tuna, where Brian is with the two girls, Amber and Brighton. This was the first time that Brian had met either of these women, but they were friends of Clint, so they weren't total strangers. They were both intoxicated, so was Brian. Recounts are blurry. They do recall Brian offering to walk them out to their car. It was late, they were drunk, there's nothing too weird about that. It's also reported, though, that Brian actually gave his phone number to one of the girls. She gave him his phone, and he put his number in it, and then he handed it back to her. This is obviously strange, as he has a girlfriend, but yeah, I won't dwell on this much, as obviously it's not clear what his intentions may have been. Before walking the girls out to the car, though, Brian changed his mind and supposedly went back into the bar. This is the girls' story. They claim that they left immediately after being seen in the CCTV, and they claim that they saw Brian leaning up against the bar at 1:58 a.m. There are police officers in the CCTV as well, sometimes 3 in the shot. It's so crazy that someone can just vanish out of thin air, seemingly disappear right in front of the police. And then, after Brighton and Amber leave at 2 a.m, Clint and Meredith leave the bar also, and they claim they didn't see Brian anywhere in the vicinity, and so they decided to leave, assuming that he was catching a ride home with someone else. Meredith called Brian at 2:01 and it went straight to voicemail, so it's very possible that Brian went missing in this 3-minute window. There is contention about whether the CCTV shows Brian putting his mobile phone into one of the girls' bags. It is honestly impossible to say because of how grainy the CCTV is. There is a moment where it looks like he reaches into his pocket to grab what could be his phone. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but because his hand and whatever might have been in it are blocked from the view of the CCTV, we can't be certain. And even if he had put his phone into the bag, surely they would have found it at some point during this entire investigation and turned it into police. Fast forward to the next day, so Saturday the 1st of April. Nobody even realised Brian was missing. Alexis was starting to get worried as it was out of character for him, and then when she returned from Toledo on Sunday, she went straight to his apartment, and when she got there, everything was in its regular order, neat and tidy. His car was still outside, his bed was made, all his belongings were there. He'd left his glasses behind. The whole place looked untouched. Something wasn't right though. It was clear to Alexis that something was wrong. That same night, on the 2nd of April, the family went out searching for Brian. They were looking near where he'd been drinking, and they were even searching in dumpsters, fearing the worst. Everyone was still holding out hope, though, that he would show up for his flight to Miami on Monday morning. When he didn't, this is when his father Randy reported him missing. The investigation began swiftly, and police met Randy at Brian's apartment. Their initial inquiries involved canvassing a 6 to 10 block area surrounding the Ugly Tuna. They were talking to literally anyone they could, knocking on doors, checking dumpsters, and going into sewer lines. According to detectives, this was one of the largest, if not the largest, police search operation in Columbus history. They approximate that around 100 police officers were involved. The search began immediately, and as we all know, the first 48 hours are the most important in any investigation. And unfortunately for Brian and his loved ones, his 48 hours were long gone. As many as 50 police officers were searching for Brian at any one time. His friends and relatives were all questioned, and most of them took lie detector tests, which they passed. And I say most because one person refused, and that was his roommate. Strangely enough, also, they didn't request tests from the 2 women he was seen talking to outside the bar, Brighton and Amber. His credit cards, bank accounts, and cell phone all remained dormant for more than a year, and this led his family to start losing hope. Nothing belonging to Brian has ever been found. No clothes, no wallet, absolutely nothing. His family and friends, though, were determined to help the cause, and they rallied everyone they could to put up flyers. Investigators eventually came to the conclusion that Brian's last known whereabouts was most likely the Ugly Tuna, and so they based a lot of their early inquiries there. They got all the CCTV surrounding the incident and went through it meticulously, tracking the comings and goings of every patron. They were confident by the end of their analysis that Brian was captured entering, but was not captured leaving. This area was pretty heavily covered with CCTV as well, so if he somehow snuck out a back entrance or something like that, it's strange that no other camera would have picked him up. And the Ugly Tuna, it's not a big bar. It's so small, in fact, that there's basically nowhere in there for him to hide. It appeared truly as if he had just vanished out of thin air. One line of inquiry that came from analysing the CCTV involved a guy wearing an orange sweater. he was seen coming in and out of the building multiple times, like 5 or 6 times, and his demeanour and actions were enough to pique the interest of detectives. And the last time he was seen leaving was directly behind Meredith and Clint. Police identified him and were able to get in contact with him, but as it turns out, he was just a taxi driver, and he was just hanging out there to try and pick up a couple of customers, and he was ultimately ruled out of the investigation. When they were satisfied that Brian did not leave through the main entrance, police began to start looking at other possibilities of how he may have exited the bar, and they weren't ruling out the fact that he may have been killed. So perhaps he had been killed in the bar and someone had taken the liberty of concealing him and removing him in a rubbish bin or something of that nature. Police began searching landfill, but ultimately they came up empty-handed. They were also running with another alternative theory that he was buried in the walls or the floor of the building, or perhaps in the neighbouring construction site. Police combed every inch of the building from the roof to the cement floor, and they were unable to find Brian. Cadaver dogs also assisted and were unable to find any trace of him. So, what exactly happened to Brian? Well, there are a bunch of theories that go with this case, and we're going to take a deep dive and look into all of them. According to experts in the case, there is no evidence to suggest that Brian had actually purchased a ring for Alexis. There were no receipts, no transactions, no reported visits to a jewellery store. Nothing besides claims made by those that knew him that he might have been preparing. It's entirely possible that Brian had purchased a ring and we just don't know about it, but Brian reportedly didn't have a lot of money. He was a college student, and with all of his other bills and whatnot, he wasn't exactly flush with cash. This would have made purchasing an engagement ring quite difficult. It's also worth discussing whether Brian may have been dealing with some other issues that not everyone knew about. Had he walked away from his own life to start another? It's rumoured that he may have said to Alexis at one point, "You just need to move on and find someone else." He was also reportedly late for his own mother's funeral, which was just not like Brian. He loved his mother and they were really close. So maybe all this stress from his life was compounding and pushing him to the edge. The day he went missing as well, he made an effort to see every person he cared about. He began his evening by having dinner at Outback Steakhouse with his dad. He reached out to his brother Derek and invited him to dinner. If he was going to disappear though, why would he do it after drinking all night? It's hard enough to make yourself disappear. So even if you were this intelligent guy like Brian, it would make more sense to do it when you're sober so you don't accidentally leave any loose ends. Did Brian even have enough money to disappear and go on the run? He wasn't wealthy, like I said before. His parents were helping him get through college and he relied on money from them. He had just been given a $4,500 check though by his father, and this was to pay the following quarter's tuition. As it turns out though, this check was never cashed in. Had Brian forgotten to turn this check in, or had he been saving it for something else? Another theory is that it was simply a case of suicide. Randy himself does not think that Brian was in any way suicidal. He rules this theory out completely, and I have to agree on the basis that nobody has found Brian's body. It was a busy night in town, and if he had killed himself anywhere near the Ugly Tuna, there's a good chance someone would have either witnessed it or found his body shortly after. Brian's friend Clint was quite involved in the early search and investigation efforts. It came out that there may have been a small argument between the two before Brian went missing. Nobody could hear what they were talking about, so it's not exactly clear if it was even an argument really. When Clint was invited in for a polygraph, he did hire an attorney, and the attorney advised him not to take the polygraph. He was also summoned to the grand jury to appear and answer questions about Brian's disappearance, but he declined this as well based on his attorney's advice. To some people, this looks suspicious, but law enforcement are adamant that he was never a suspect or person of interest in the investigation. After some time passed, Randy hired a private investigator as well to make sure no leaf had been unturned. Despite this, it seemed like the case was going to go cold. That was until a new clue came to authorities on the 8th of September. Let me break it down. Since Brian had gone missing, Alexis had been intermittently trying to call his mobile phone. She would call it every night and it would go to voicemail immediately. Then, on the 8th of September, when she called his number, she claims it began ringing. It was pinging off a cell phone tower 14 miles away from the Ugly Tuna. However, searches of the area revealed no new evidence. The authorities queried the cell phone company and they said that it was most likely a glitch and there was nothing to be alarmed about. The engineer from the company said what likely happened was the cell tower may have gotten busy and the line began ringing without actually being able to connect. There is a bit of contention surrounding this though, because obviously this happened in 2006, so technology has changed and we understand more about technology. Some experts claim that there is a possibility Brian's phone at the very least had battery remaining and could have been turned on. It doesn't give us a whole lot of information though. It could be that Brian is on the run and turned his phone on for a split second. It could be that someone killed him and took his phone, only to turn it on months later. Personally, I think it's more likely that it was a glitch, because what are the chances that the phone was turned on for a split second just before Alexis called? Brian's apartment was broken into on the 11th of May, so just over a month after his disappearance, and this was either a huge coincidence or a targeted attack. Unfortunately, the culprit was never caught, as when police arrived, they were gone. It does beg the question though, if someone was responsible for Brian's disappearance, were they also connected to the burglary? When you consider all the facts in this case, it's clear that Brian made it out of the Ugly Tuna one way or another. We know this because if he hadn't, his body would have definitely been found. So let's just for a minute forget about how he got out and consider what happened to him after he left the bar. He was within walking distance to his apartment, so it's likely that's where he was headed. Had he run into some sort of trouble on his walk home? The area was not exactly safe in 2006, and it was also 2 a.m, so anything could happen. There had been murders in the area recently, not too far from the Ugly Tuna. If Brian had been murdered though, the killer must have done a superb job at hiding all the evidence because not a single trace of Brian has ever been found. Not a wallet, not a piece of clothing, nothing at all. Some online conspiracists draw similarities between Brian's disappearance and the Smiley Face murders. And for those of you that don't know about the Smiley Face murders, it's a theory that suggests 45 young men across the Midwest who had been found dead in bodies of water did not actually drown, but were actually the victims of one or more serial killers. The name comes from the fact that police found graffiti depicting a smiley face near where the bodies were dumped in at least a dozen of these cases. In a lot of these cases, their situations are remarkably similar to Brian's. They go to a bar, they get separated from their friends, and then they disappear, only to be found in a body of water. The obvious difference between these cases and Brian's, though, is that Brian has never been found. Because of this alone, it's a loose connection in my opinion, but there was also no smiley face graffiti found anywhere near where he went missing or where police were searching. Police did obviously look into the idea that Brian may have drowned in the Olentangy River, which was only about a 30-minute walk from the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Law enforcement reject this theory and claim there wouldn't have been enough current for Brian's body to have been swept away and never found. Police searched the river and neighbouring water bodies and came up empty-handed. The water level was also quite low at the time, so if he had drowned in the Olentangy River, he would have been found. It also just wasn't on his way home, so it wouldn't have made sense for him to have gone out of his way like that. John Hurst, the lead investigator for Brian's case, does not buy either of these theories. He thinks there is a chance that he is still alive, but acknowledges that there is an even greater chance that he is not alive. He notes that the private dumpsters surrounding the area at the time were emptied on the Monday Brian was reported missing, before any search efforts could have begun. Their contents were disposed of in landfill in Tennessee, which made searching them much harder. Had Brian fallen into a dumpster somehow and passed out or died? There's just so many questions with this case, and with no trace left behind, it makes you wonder if there's a possibility that he is still alive. Not only that, but how did he get out of the Ugly Tuna Saloona? Brian's father has since passed, which leaves only his younger brother Derek remaining. It was another tragic circumstance for the Shaffer family when Randy was struck and killed by a falling tree branch in a storm. The storm had actually subsided and he had gone outside to inspect the damage caused by the winds of Hurricane Ike. While he was outside, the winds picked back up and he was ultimately killed. His body was not found until the following day. I can't imagine the poor grief Derek must have had to endure. He lost his mum to cancer, and then a month later his brother went missing, and then just over 2 years later his father dies in a freak accident. I just can't even comprehend how tragic all of this is. I feel so heartbroken for Derek, and despite all of this, he still remains optimistic that Brian is out there somewhere, and he has never given up hope looking for his brother. After Randy's death, someone actually posted a comment on his online obituary reading, "I miss you, Dad. Love, Brian." The location attached to the comment was the US Virgin Islands, but law enforcement actually traced it to a public library computer in Columbus, Ohio. They went through the surveillance footage but were unable to determine who was on that computer at the time of posting. The consensus ended up being that it was a cruel hoax, which I think is just so messed up. Derek has lost his entire immediate family, and someone is out there trying to mess with him still. There have been sightings of Brian all over the world. The most notable sighting was in 2020 when a photo of a homeless American man went viral because he had an uncanny resemblance to Brian. You've got to admit, they do look pretty similar. That's what the FBI thought, and they used rigorous facial analysis to determine that it wasn't Brian. If he was still alive, he would be 42 years old, and this is a digital mock-up of what the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation thinks he would look like. The case remains open and ongoing, and tips still come through occasionally. There is currently a $100,000 reward on offer for anyone who provides information leading to his discovery. Unfortunately for Derek and Alexis and those who knew Brian, there have been no recent developments in the case. Alexis has gone on to get married and have 2 children, and Derek has never given up looking for Brian. Before we conclude this video, I want to read a quote from Brian's brother Derek. "Every day I think about my brother and wish that someone would come forward with answers. I will always stay hopeful for a miracle that he will be found alive and well, but as time passes, that hope fades. If anyone does have anything to report in relation to Brian's disappearance, please contact Central Ohio Crime Stoppers." Brian was legally declared dead on April of 2013 as a way to free up assets for Derek. But still, we have no evidence to prove that he is even dead. We have no evidence to say he's alive, and we have no evidence to say he's dead. What do you think, though? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Do you think he's alive? What do you think happened to Brian? Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.